Why is DNA important and how do we know what it looks like? Well, to answer this, first we have to understand what DNA is. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, is a genetic polymer that contains the blueprint for an organism's development and function. What's a polymer? Well, a polymer is just a chain made up of monomers, poly meaning many and mer meaning parts or segments. Think friendship bracelet, where the monomers are the beads and the polymer is the friendship bracelet itself. These monomers are called nucleotides. A nucleotide is made up of three components. The first one is the carbon sugar base, which is deoxyribose if you're talking about DNA, or it's ribose if you're talking about RNA. DNA lacks an oxygen atom, which is why it's called deoxyribose. The second component is a phosphate group. And together, the first and second component, so the sugar base and the phosphate, create what's known as the sugar-phosphate backbone. The third and final component is a nitrogenous base. There are 5 nitrogenous bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, and uracil. Uracil is only used when you're talking about RNA. The thymine and the uracil swap. So in RNA, you're using uracil. In DNA, you're using thymine. DNA is a double helix, and it resembles a bendy ladder. And in the center, our nitrogenous bases are bound together via hydrogen bonds and create what are known as base pairs. There are rules to this, okay? So adenine and thymine are bonded together, and cytosine and guanine are binded together, and that's the rule. When we think DNA, we have to think code. It's an encryption where A, G, T, and C are the alphabet, and then enzymes come in to translate these codes to create amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Any one of these sequences can create any one of the common 20 amino acids found in the human body. Each amino acid produces a different protein. Any sequence that produces a protein is known as a gene. If you think about it, our cells are constantly replicating and dying. From our skin cells to our organ cells, we are literally made up of cells. And genes contain biological information that need to be copied accurately every single time. And now that we have our bases covered, how do we know what it looks like? You can thank Watson and Crick. You can thank Rosalind Franklin. You see, the answer is a little bit more complex than that, because while Watson and Crick typically get credited for discovering DNA's helical structure, it was actually, without her consent, Rosalind Franklin who gave them the final piece of the puzzle. Franklin got her PhD in chemistry, and she worked in a lab in Paris where she was able to analyze carbons using X-ray crystallography, and she excelled at it. She went on to publish 21 papers on carbon structures and 19 papers on viruses. Franklin used her skills to study the atomic structure of coal, and in her findings, she was able to help people produce and use coal more efficiently. Because of this, she was invited to participate in a fellowship with Maurice Wilkins and John Randall, who were studying DNA protein in London. It is important to note that around this time, many scientists across the world were trying to discover the structure of DNA. And here's where the drama starts, because what's science without a little drama? But before we dive in, we have to bring up Raymond Gosling, who was also in the race to discover the structure of DNA, and he did find that it was helical, but he didn't isolate the DNA, which resulted in a blurry picture. And without proof, you have nothing. And that's how Franklin gets involved and she joins the race. She was able to make several discoveries about DNA, including confirmation of the helical shape with a clear picture to prove it. She was interested to know why DNA changed its structure depending on its environment, moisture versus dried out. Her curiosity led her to pause her research on the structure of DNA to focus more on how the environment impacted DNA. During her side quest, remember how she was part of a fellowship? Well, her colleague Wilkins, without her knowledge and consent, sent her picture of the helical structure to Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick were also in the race to discover the structure of DNA, but they just didn't have a reference for it. After they received her picture, they were able to finish building their model and publish their paper, and you guessed it, they didn't credit her. But don't worry, we know the contribution she made to science, and she's finally getting the recognition she deserves.